Laudetur Jesus Christus. May Jesus Christ be praised. I was away for half of the week, but before I left, I remembered to look up my rumination banner. You may remember that a ruminant is an animal with several stomachs, like a cow, who takes in its food and partially digests it, and then brings it back up and digests it some more, and then brings it up a third time before it gets all the nutrients from that food. So that's what I hope will happen to you this week, not that you will bring your food up several times. If you're expecting an organized presentation filled with rhetorical wonders, you should go back to sleep now. I am not here to give you answers. I do not intend to tell you how to live. I am here instead to pose some questions, to give you some food for thought, and if I'm lucky, perhaps, provide you with something to ponder over the week. The scriptures we have heard this morning have so many jumping off points that we could be here longer than 2 hours and there'd be no water left. We have Abraham and the three strangers. At the 7:30 garden service, Chelsea had a part of a tree growing out of her head. Perhaps we could talk about the oaks of Mamre. We could talk about Sarah, the barren one, who laughs when she is told that by next year at this time she'd have a son. We could talk about the instructions on how to live that we heard from the letter to the Hebrews, one of the most unjustly neglected books of the New Testament. If you haven't read it, I suggest you do that. You can also come to Tuesday morning Bible study. That's the book that we're reading now. Or we could talk about the Golden Rule, as stated in the Gospel of Luke. The story of Abraham's visitors is known in the Eastern Orthodox tradition as the hospitality of Abraham. And it's one of those slightly odd stories in that epic of Abraham that we find in the book of Genesis. The final editor of that book has chosen to end this passage at the end of chapter 18, where Sarah snorts. It says laughs, but it was really a snort. Yeah, right. And the visitor said, "Sarah, you laughed." And she says, "No, I didn't." And the angel says, "Yes, you did." You expect something to happen. What happens next? Anybody know? Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah happens next. We have to wait a couple more chapters till chapter 21, when Sarah and Abraham have their child, who is named Isaac. I did not choose these readings. Isaac means laughter, because Sarah laughed when she heard she was going to have a child at age 90. I'm sure our 90-year-olds would look forward to that. In the passage we heard from the letter to the Hebrews, Abraham's hospitality is referred to in verse 2. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it. How many times have we had angels in our house? How many times have you been in someone else's house? Last week we heard a section of Matthew's Sermon on the Mount. This week we heard something from Luke's Sermon on the Plain. That's Plain, not the flying kind. Matthew ends his passage with the words, "Perfect as the Father of heaven is merciful as your Father is merciful." Why the difference? Why does Matthew say perfect and Luke say merciful? Is there a difference? Matthew says, Father in heaven. Luke just says, your Father. Is there a difference? For the last several weeks, we've been looking at the concept of neighbor, neighborhood, and neighborliness. And we've been using Mr. Rogers as a sort of backdrop for this discussion. Today's suggested emphasis is neighbors who are far off or unknown. Actually, here at St. Matthew's, I don't know that we need to spend a lot of time thinking or talking about this. Whenever a call goes out for help, to help flood victims or hurricane victims or any sort of natural disaster, we are there. We are also well aware of people who are not our neighbors in the traditional sense, whose current status calls out to us for our concern. Those in the major heat wave in Europe, for example, or those who are caught in the middle of wildfires in California or other places. Those whose homes are in danger in Hawaii because of the volcano and or the approaching hurricane. Not to mention those Thai soccer players who were stuck in a cave several weeks ago. It's easy to feel something for those people faced with major life-threatening issues. But what about names on our prayer list? Names of people we don't know that are on that list. Why should we care? And why are they even on our prayer list? Perhaps those are angels we should be aware of. I'd like to suggest that our closing hymn this morning is my attempt to talk to that point. Lord, I want to be more loving in my heart. Lord, I want to be more holy. I want to be more Christian. I want to be like Jesus in my heart. In my heart, Lord. Is that something I'm addressing every day of my life? Do I really want to be more holy, more loving, more Christian, more like Jesus? After all, I'm not going to change the world, right? Some of you know I was at George Mason University this week for a choral directors conference. And as always, the end of the conference was a festival concert. There were 3 choirs that performed, one of conductors, a festival chorus of adults, and as always, closing was a segment sung by school children, ages 7 to 15. There were about 100 of them from Maryland, Virginia, and DC. And their last anthem had the text, "Stay the course, light a star, change the world wherever you are." To quote a poem by Edward Everett Hale, who died in 1909, he was a great nephew of the famous Nathan Hale of the Revolutionary War and a cousin of Helen Keller. I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. What is the something that I can do? Maybe it's chuckling at that utterly ridiculous message that at age 90, like Sarah, I'm going to bring forth a child. Maybe it's following the example of one of the holy people of the past or present. Someone I've recently discovered is a man called Pierre Lefebvre, or Peter Faber in English, who was born in 1506 in Savoy, France, and died in 1546 in Rome. He is sometimes called the second Jesuit. When Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, moved to Paris to study at about age 35, he needed a place to live. And Pierre and his friend Francisco Javier invited him to live with them. They were 22. He was 36. And Peter was perhaps Ignatius's best friend. He was also a very busy guy, which is probably why he died at age 40. He was sent to 25 different cities during his 25-year career. He traveled all over, mostly by foot, in Italy, Switzerland, Germany, France, Belgium, Spain, and Portugal. He was sent by the Pope to Worms for the famous Diet meeting there with Luther. And afterwards, his comment was, "My biggest surprise was that given the state of the church, that there aren't more Lutherans." In his diary, he wrote a prayer in which he asks for God's mercy on himself, and then on the Pope, and then the Holy Roman Emperor, and then the King of France, who was Francis I, the King of England, Henry VIII, Martin Luther, Martin Bucer, Philip Melanchthon, all Protestant reformers, and perhaps most surprisingly, the Sultan. Because we're all brothers and sisters together, we all have our faults, and we all need to have compassion on one another, as God has compassion on us. Peter's Jesuit brothers remember him telling them, "Take care. Take care. And always take care to keep your heart open and ready for others." Do I do that? Do I have compassion for those who disagree with me in areas of religion, in areas of politics, or perhaps most importantly, can I forgive anyone who thinks that steak is only correctly cooked when it's well done? Lord, I want to be more loving, more holy, more Christian. Lord, I want to be like Jesus in my heart. Amen.